While the great universities and libraries of Baghdad lay in ruins beneath the smoke of Mongol conquest, the flame of human knowledge had already escaped. Long before any scholar's ink ever met the waters of the Tigris, copies of precious texts had slipped west along the sea lanes of the Mediterranean and overland caravan routes. They went past the Maghreb's rocky coasts, through the gates of Gibraltar, and into a land where the cultures of the East and West were braided together into something singular. Tonight we reach the final chapter of our trilogy on the Mediterranean Renaissance, the fabled bookworld of Córdoba in Al-Andalus. This is the story of how the renewed wisdom of Greece, India, and Persia surged back into a waking Europe, accelerating the intellectual changes that helped prepare the way for the modern world. To see how a jewel of science and poetry emerged in southern Iberia, we start with a refugee. In the mid-8th century, the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads in Damascus. A young Umayyad prince, Abd al-Rahman, escaped the slaughter, crossed North Africa, and made his way to the Iberian Peninsula. There, he unified fractured Muslim factions and founded an independent emirate in Córdoba. He and his successors imported Syrian courtly traditions, irrigation techniques, and plant citrus, pomegranates, and more, along with an intense reverence for writing. Over generations, that seed became Al-Andalus, a realm that produced urban splendor and learning on a scale unusual in contemporary Western Europe. Córdoba's political apex came with Abd al-Rahman III, who proclaimed himself caliph in 999, asserting parity with Baghdad and Cairo. His son, Al-Hakam II, presided over what many sources describe as a cultural golden age. Al-Hakam was renowned for his book collecting. Medieval chronicles credit his agents with buying manuscripts in Cairo, Damascus, and the eastern lands, sometimes as soon as new copies were produced. Numbers in the sources are extravagant claims of hundreds of thousands of volumes circulate, but even allowing for exaggeration, Córdoba's book hoards were extraordinary for their era. Catalogues, called Fihrist, index titles across subjects: law, theology, grammar, medicine, astronomy, mathematics, and poetry. In a time when many Latin Christian libraries counted manuscripts in the tens or hundreds, Córdoba boasted a bibliophilic infrastructure: book dealers, copyists, binders, that made texts move. To picture the city around the year 980, imagine a bustling capital whose population modern scholars debate. Plausible estimates range from around 100,000 to perhaps 300,000 at its height. Along whitewashed avenues, water flowed through channels tunneled from the nearby Sierra. Gardens were cultivated with new crops and techniques, drawing on Roman inheritances and innovations from the East. Public baths were common, and travelers remarked on cleanliness and urban amenities that surpassed what they had seen elsewhere in Western Europe. Some chroniclers even describe lamps lining main thoroughfares at night. Whether every street was illuminated or not, there is no question that Córdoba projected the image of a polished, well-run metropolis. At its heart rose the great mosque, expanded multiple times and crowned with dazzling ribbed domes, and the Palatine city of Madinat al-Zahra. A short distance away, where administrative and ceremonial life flourished until it was destroyed in the early 11th century civil wars. Within this courtly ecosystem, the royal libraries and private collections multiplied. The scriptorium was not just a monastic preserve, it was an urban industry. Arabic sources mention women working as scribes and calligraphers, and one figure stands out in later memory: Lubna of Córdoba, celebrated as a gifted copyist, mathematician, and secretary at court. The legendary accounts present her as a learned administrator involved in the library's operations, a sign that in this environment, talent could sometimes cut across conventional boundaries. Alongside her, we know of poetesses such as Walada bint al-Mustakfi, a generation later, whose salons in Córdoba nurtured literary culture during the city's waning years. Córdoba's book machine was fed by a cosmopolitan society. Muslims, Christians, and Jews lived in proximity under rules that varied over time, sometimes allowing broad cooperation, sometimes restricting it. The ideal of convivencia coexistence captures part of the story. Shared languages, notably Arabic, commercial forums, and collaborative scholarship. The other part is the reality of hierarchy and periodic repression, including taxes and legal disabilities for non-Muslims, and later, harsher policies under North African reform movements. Within those shifting constraints, scholars built bridges. Hasdai ibn Shaprut, a Jewish physician and diplomat in the 10th century, famously facilitated the study of Dioscorides' pharmacological text, arranging expert help to understand plant names and medicinal applications. In courts and homes, books circulated among Arabic, Hebrew, and the Romance dialects, which themselves were layered with Arabic loanwords in fields like science and craft. From this soil emerged figures who made an outsized mark on intellectual history. Maslama al-Madriti, a 10th–11th century mathematician and astronomer of Córdoba, engaged with algebraic methods and transmitted astronomical tables that helped systematize observation. Abu al-Qasim al-Zahrawi, known in Latin as Abul Qasis, produced an encyclopedic surgical manual, the Al-Tasrif, that described procedures and instruments with unusual precision. That work, translated into Latin in the 12th century, became a cornerstone of European surgical teaching for centuries. Ibn Hazm, the polymath and sharp-tongued theologian, composed The Ring of the Dove, one of the most elegant early treatises on love, alongside legal and philosophical works that probed logic and ethics. A century later, Córdoba nurtured two names that would echo across continents: Ibn Rushd, Averroes, and Moses Maimonides. Ibn Rushd, a jurist and physician as well as philosopher, wrote penetrating commentaries on Aristotle, often clarifying Greek thought through Arabic lenses. He argued that revealed religion and rational inquiry, rightly understood, are not at war but address truth in complementary ways. Maimonides, born in Córdoba, fled with his family when the Almohads imposed strict policies in the mid-12th century. He eventually settled in Fustat, Old Cairo. There, writing in Judeo-Arabic, he composed the Guide for the Perplexed, wrestling with the same Aristotelian inheritance to reconcile reason and Torah. Their debates reverberated not only in Islamic and Jewish circles, but also after translation in Latin Christian universities. The transfer of knowledge from Arabic into Latin was not confined to Córdoba, and that geographic nuance matters. Toledo, reconquered by Christian forces in 1085 and home to large Arabic and Hebrew-speaking communities, became the primary translation hub in the 12th and 13th centuries. There, teams of translators, often a Mozarabic or Jewish intermediary, rendering Arabic into a Romance vernacular, and a trained Latinist, crafting the final Latin produced a torrent of texts. Gerard of Cremona, the most prolific, translated more than 70 works in Toledo, including Ptolemy's Almagest and Avicenna's Canon of Medicine, as well as treatises by Al-Razi and others. Latin versions of Al-Khwarizmi's algebra circulated via translators such as Robert of Chester and were absorbed into teaching. Scholars like Daniel of Morley traveled south, encountered this intellectual abundance, and wrote of Western Europe's relative poverty in the mathematical sciences by comparison. These translations mattered because of what they contained and how they were built. Greek works arrived entwined with centuries of commentary from Syriac and Arabic scholars. The Aristotle that Paris and Oxford received in the 13th century came with interpretive scaffolding Averroes, chief among its carpenters. Not every student in medieval Europe read Averroes, but his analyses became fixtures in the arts faculties, and debates about his positions on the eternity of the world, on the unity of the intellect sparked controversy and innovation. Roger Bacon urged experimental methods while digesting optics filtered through Ibn al-Haytham, Al-Hazan, and his Arabic readers. Thomas Aquinas grappled with Aristotle through both Greek and Arabic channels, citing the commentator, Averroes, even as he often disagreed with him. The Iberian Peninsula also acted as a laboratory for practical knowledge. Paper perfected in the Islamic world after its origins in East Asia was used widely in Al-Andalus, lowering costs and speeding copying. By the 12th century, the first European paper mills appeared in regions such as Zátiva in Valencia, catalyzing a shift from parchment to paper that would later dovetail with printing. Agricultural manuals compiled in Arabic described crop rotations, irrigation, and grafting techniques. Botanical gardens in Andalusian cities acclimated new species. Astronomers like Al-Zarqali in Toledo produced the Toledan tables, which informed European astronomy for generations, while instrument makers refined astrolabes whose inscriptions crossed languages and confessions. None of this should encourage a fairy tale. The political scaffolding that supported Córdoba's book culture was fragile. After Al-Hakam II, factional rivalries intensified. A powerful court figure, Al-Mansur, dominated the late 10th century as Hajib, chamberlain, and led spectacular military campaigns. Sources hostile to him also accuse his regime of purging certain philosophical and rationalist works from court libraries to appease conservative clerics. Whether this constituted a generalized book burning on the scale found in later legend is debated, but it appears that some texts were removed or destroyed. In the early 11th century, the caliphate imploded in civil war, the fitna of Al-Andalus. Berber troops and urban factions fought. Madinat al-Zahra was sacked and ruined. Books were looted and scattered. Córdoba survived as a city, but the unified caliphate gave way to smaller Taifa kingdoms, each sponsoring culture to varying degrees, none restoring the old equilibrium. Centuries later, as Christian powers advanced southward, patterns of coexistence narrowed. After 1492, the Catholic monarchs completed the conquest of Granada. The Archbishop Francisco Jiménez de Cisneros oversaw campaigns against Arabic books, famously in 1499 to 1501 in Granada, where large numbers of manuscripts were seized and burned. Contemporary and later sources disagree on totals. Modern historians consider figures in the tens of thousands plausible, not the million sometimes claimed. Whatever the exact number, the intent was clear: to erase language and memory. Yet even by then, much of the scientific and philosophical corpus had long since been translated, glossed, printed, and embedded in curricula far beyond Spain. So what precisely did Córdoba and its sister cities contribute to Europe's reorientation? Start with methods and media. The shift to paper accelerated the pace of copying. Urban scriptoriums, with trained professionals, men and women, multiplied texts. Scholars systematized disciplines, medicine, law, logic, into comprehensive manuals and commentaries that could be taught and disputed. Translators developed procedures for technical vocabulary, how to render a Greek concept that had traveled into Arabic and now needed a faithful Latin home. They created lexicons, marginalia, and concordances to make this possible. Then add content: algebraic reasoning, astronomical parameters and optics, pharmacology and surgery, metaphysics and ethics. All arrived not as isolated imports, but as interlocking sets. The idea of disciplined inquiry, of weighing authorities against observation and reason, traveled in these packages too. Even small, specific items mattered. Improved navigational tools like the mariner's astrolabe, better tables for latitude and timekeeping, and practical manuals for irrigation or accounting. In architecture and the crafts, techniques of vaulting, stucco, and inlay spread with artisans who moved across the peninsula's permeable frontiers. It is also worth restoring a few names that often slip to the margins. Ziryab, a 9th century musician from the Eastern Islamic world, revolutionized Córdoba's courtly culture long before Al-Hakam II, introducing new musical modes, refined culinary and etiquette practices, and fashions that symbolized cosmopolitan taste. Ibn al-Cid of Badajoz contributed to logic and lexicography. The physician Ibn Juljul compiled biographies of doctors and pharmacologists, preserving chains of knowledge that linked Greece, Syria, and Al-Andalus. These lives show that Córdoba's achievement was not only about a single great library, however magnificent, but about an ecosystem of teachers, patrons, craftspeople, and readers. As we weigh legend against evidence, a picture emerges that is at once less romantic and more impressive. The oft-repeated figure of 400,000 volumes for Córdoba's library is almost certainly inflated if taken literally. The logistics of shelving, storing, and cataloguing that many codices in the 10th century are daunting. But the point behind the number, that Córdoba commanded an unparalleled concentration of books in Western Europe, is sound. Similarly, while the phrase "streetlights for miles" may gloss over the unevenness of medieval infrastructure, the city's level of urban amenity was real and remarked upon by contemporaries. Convivencia was neither utopia nor myth. It was a set of pragmatic accommodations that made shared intellectual life possible, punctuated by periods of strain and rupture. The channels from Al-Andalus to the rest of Europe were not linear either. Southern Italy and Sicily, under Islamic, then Norman rule, acted as additional conduits. Greek manuscripts and Arabic texts both flowed through there. In the 13th century, new direct translations from Greek into Latin, by William of Moerbeke among others, complemented the earlier Arabic-Latin versions, and the two strands sometimes clashed, sometimes converged. The story is not one of simple transmission, but of transformation. Commentators argued, abridged, corrected, and sometimes rejected what they received. Yet for all the complexity, the direction of travel is unmistakable. By the early 13th century, the universities of Paris, Bologna, and Oxford were teaching Aristotelian natural philosophy in a way unimaginable without Arabic intermediaries. By the 15th century, European surgeons still cited Abulcasis. Astronomers still used tables derived from Andalusian models. Philosophers still contended with Averroes, and Jewish and Islamic scholars continued their own internal debates shaped by the same inheritance. Paper mills had spread, book production had accelerated, and the conditions for the print revolution were in place. Córdoba's end as a capital of learning did not erase its imprint, just as the burning of manuscripts in Granada did not halt the long arc of exchange. Ideas are resilient, not because they cannot be destroyed, but because they are copied, translated, and taught threaded into the memory of communities. In that sense, the Library of Córdoba is larger than any one building. It is a shorthand for a century-spanning conversation. Alexandria, gathering Greek wisdom, Baghdad testing and enlarging it, Al-Andalus adapting, teaching, and forwarding it on. The calamities, civil strife, purges, sackings are part of the story, but so are the quiet routines. The scribe's steady hand, the teacher's gloss in the margin, the physician's trial of a procedure described by a faraway author. When we stand back from our trilogy, the pattern is clear. History is not a chain of isolated miracles, it is a river of shared work. Knowledge belongs to no single empire, no single faith, and no single language. It is a common inheritance passed from hand to hand across time and conflict. The repositories of Alexandria, Baghdad, and Córdoba may have fallen to dust, but their collective spirit endures every time we check a map, pose a proof, tune an instrument, or chart the heavens. They demonstrate that our greatest achievement as a species is not merely to discover, but to remember, to carry forward, revise, and renew. Thank you for watching The Layback Historian. If this journey through the Mediterranean Renaissance has sparked your curiosity, subscribe. Leave a comment about the figure or city you'd like us to explore next, and share this episode with fellow travelers in time. Until next time, take care and keep following the threads that connect our world.